Hello, class. My name is Dexter Waltz. I'm here to cover and review the book, The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoffer. This is the book here. It's my copy. I read this and also listened to the Audible version of it on my iPhone, which is really awesome. Before I get into the actual book, though, the author, Dietrich Bonhoffer, has a lot of history behind himself and who he is, which I want to cover before the book. That's going to set the stage for how this book and why this book was written. So, Dietrich Bonhoffer was born in 1906 in Germany, but what is now Poland. So, it helps give us a map of where he was born. Dietrich had 7 other siblings. He was born into a very large family and a pretty notable family as well. His history line has some pretty notable people in it, as well as himself and his brothers. His father is Karl Bonhoffer. At the time, he was a notable psychiatrist and neurologist. Made some great advances in those fields, and also was well known for his debates and rebuttals against Sigmund Freud, which we all know today even. His mother is Paula Bonhoffer, and she was the daughter of the Protestant theologian Karl van Haas. He was pretty well known as well. That was in his family line. Needless to say, Bonhoffer grew up in a large family, but a well-off family as well. He had a great education too, so he was a time when not too many people were able to get that. He was, which helped him in his theological studies. Before he dove into the theological studies, though, he was actually a very well-off musician. So at an early age, his parents and his siblings noticed his giftings in music. They wanted him to pursue that, but around the age 14, 15, 16, he decided he didn't want to anymore and wanted to study theology, in which his parents weren't too happy with, actually. So Bonhoffer continued down that path, as we know, and he took his education to the University of Tübingen. Hopefully I pronounced that right. That's where he earned his undergraduate and master's degree. He later right after that, he went to finish his doctorates at Berlin University. In 1927 is when he finished his doctorates there at the age of 21 years old. So you can see how wise and smart Bonhoffer is to continue his education one right after another at a pretty young age. In 1931, after his doctorates, Bonhoffer took an offer to become an exchange student at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He only stayed there for a year after some debates theologically that he had with the school. He ended up moving back to Germany, in where he became a professor at Berlin University, where he obtained his doctorates. Around this time, the election of Adolf Hitler was happening. The masses loved Adolf Hitler in the very beginning, in which Dietrich Bonhoffer actually strongly opposed from the beginning and called other Christians to do the same. Because of this, Dietrich Bonhoffer helped found a church denomination called the Confessing Church. Their primary goal was to stand against the Nazi Party and what many Christians were falling into, aligning themselves with Adolf Hitler's ideologies, which Bonhoffer opposed. While the Nazi Party grew stronger in opposition with Christianity and humanity, actually in general, Bonhoffer began traveling across Germany to teach privately Christians what it means to actually follow Christ. So because he did this, or before he did this, sorry, he was encouraged to not publicly preach and publicly speak. So he did this privately, going through Germany, in which, in light of that, in light of his private travels to teach Christians, the book, The Cost of Discipleship, was written. So this, all this being said, kind of lays the groundwork for why, how, what was going on during this time. The Cost of Discipleship, I'll touch base on a little bit later, but it goes into the core teachings of Christianity and what Dietrich Bonhoffer taught many different Christians in Germany at that time. This was written in 1937 to give a better timeline. He later lived in the United States for a couple years, two, maybe three, I think. And then he returned back to Germany after a feeling of sense of guilt for speaking out against the oppression of the Nazi Party while living in security. So it's kind of cool to hear him say this in his own exact words. And this is what he says. I have come to the conclusion that I have made a mistake in coming to America. Christians in Germany will have to face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that Christian civilization may survive onward, or willing the victory of their nation and therefore destroying civilization. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice from security. So you see maybe this kind of inner battle within Dietrich Bonhoffer while he's living in America, seeing his home country falling down. So he moves back from the United States back to Germany at this time. In April of 1943, Bonhoffer was arrested for helping a group of Jews escape to the neutral land of Switzerland. There he continued to write since he was silenced in public. So while in prison, he composed a couple of different, I think maybe a book or two different books, but wrote while in prison. July 20th of 1944, an attempt to assassinate Hitler took place, in which Bonhoffer was considered linked to that conspiracy. So this eventually led to his death by hanging on April 8th of 1945. You can see Bonhoffer did so much stuff in his life, in his short period of life. So it's very important to know who the author is before reading this book, in which now we will I'll review the book. The main arguments of the book. First, it's grounded in the teachings of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. So in each chapter, you'll see a scripture verse. This one is Matthew 5, 1 through 12. The scripture is lined out, and then he goes and he teaches from it. Many different chapters are lined out like that. I personally like it like that, and that's how this book is written. Bonhoeffer's main argument, though, in the book is an attack on cheap grace. So, like I mentioned before, Christians were falling victim to the Nazi sway. So, wanting to maintain your Christianity, but also trying to merge these two things together. It wasn't really working out, and where grace was cheapened, the call of the cost of discipleship was cheapened by the Christians because they try to merge these two things together, in which Dietrich Bonhoffer in this book attacks. So that's the main argument, is the cost of discipleship is a costly thing to consider, not something cheap, not a cheap grace. That's the main argument for the book, and you can see it throughout each chapter as well. I think I didn't have too many concerns or difficulties reading the book. I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a very easy read. I'm a pretty slow reader too, so it takes me a couple of times to read things. And this one was fairly easy. I would almost say this is probably my favorite book so far I've read in my Christian walk. If not my favorite, then a close second or third. I recommend it to anybody at any stage in life. A new believer, definitely recommend it to read this book for a new believer, or if you're mature in your faith and want to understand the cost of discipleship again. It definitely convicted me in many areas of my life. So highly recommend, highly enjoyed the book. It was just a fun read and a good one too. Another thing I enjoyed about the book was the chapters are so short. So it's not 30 pages for a chapter to finish. It's just a handful of pages, and then you're on to the next thing, which is nice. It breaks things up in sections, and you feel like you actually gain some ground in the book as well. My personal favorite chapters were chapter 18 and 19, so if you have read the book, kind of get a feel for where I am with it. So the last question is, why did Christians in that day and in the later eras find this book significant and helpful? And once again, I refer back to the history of the book, the Nazi regime, and the things that were going on at the time. It was a call to actually live out the gospel and not cheapen the gospel, cheapen grace. So it can be both convicting for the people of that time to actually consider the cost of discipleship, and encouraging as well to know that there are faithful Christians out there who want to really live for the Lord. So both convicting and encouraging, I'm sure, for the readers of that time. So Bonhoffer, just in this book, once again, is calling Christians to do the opposite of what the Nazi Party is doing, and to follow Christ and not follow some kind of political agenda. So that's the review of the book. That's a review of Dietrich Bonhoffer. There is so much more that can be said about him and his life and his ministry. The man wore so many different hats in such a short amount of time living that it's very encouraging to read this book. Overall, like I mentioned, easily one of my top favorite 5 books, if not at the top of the list. And it's a highly recommend read for any believer at any stage in life. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to hear your comments. Bye.